Well, I finally found time to get around to finishing up the comic book series from the 90s of Star Trek The Early Voyages concerning the adventures of the Enterprise under the command of Captain Christopher Pike. And, of course, this was in some response to the Strange New World series, and gee, can you guess which one I thought did it better? Yes, the comic book series did. Even though it's not that great of a comic book series. And it's understandable why it only lasted 17 issues. It started to kind of deteriorate on the way out. Certainly the last few, the artwork was looks like it kind of got slapped in there. It probably was hurried. I don't know. And there were setups for further stories. There's this rivalry between Pike and this Klingon, and they suddenly wrapped that up in the, I guess the second to last issue, where, hey, ironically, he sacrifices himself to save Pike. It wasn't his goal, but it was the situation he was in and that sort of thing. The story in and of itself was all right, but I think it was rushed because it seemed like they were also developing this potential romance between Pike and this Klingon woman, since they were both. This was a sort of prime directive story, and both sides were in disguise of these rather xenophobic pre-warp alien society. And messing and manipulating with their religion. And I gotta say that they were talking about these super duper pooper scooper weapons that the Klingons wanted, that these people had, that was left behind by some ancient alien race that they perceived as gods, so on and so forth. And the concepts and stuff could have been pretty cool. The weapons themselves were just giant robots. Maybe they could do more. But then it just ends. One of the other interesting aspects of it was Robert April shows up, and it looks like they would have delved more into his story as, the first captain of the Enterprise. And had this been more successful and had more, interest and energy to it, maybe there would have been a spinoff series about his years. There's a whole series you could do. That the sky is not quite the limit. You are reined in by what happened on the original series, and this series does a much better job of trying to avoid missteps there. They didn't quite succeed, but much better than what the Secret Hideout versions do, which never tried at all, and then later admitted, well, it's an alternate timeline, so you could do whatever you want, even though that's still kind of lazy because, for instance, why would Robert April be black in your universe and white in the other one? That's like one of those. That's not too hard to figure out. It's just, one of his parents got with someone else, and they still had that name in mind. Maybe it's named after a grandparent or something. So, yeah, that's kind of easy to get around, maybe. But then again, it's like in the movies, well, how did Sulu turn gay because Kirk's dad died? Yeah. Well, anyway, but easily the comic book series was better than Strange New Worlds. And most notably because Captain Pike actually got to be the captain, and he got to do a lot more stuff. All in all, in the TV series, it's really only one episode where he got to do that. And even that's not all that wonderful. It's just good by comparison to all the other slop, So, and then there's a bunch of extra characters that were put in here to fill out the cast, and for the most part, it's, I guess, all right. A new alien character in there, and they pursued that in a very Star Trekian way, so that's a plus on them. And of course, poor Dr. Boyce, who's completely erased in this alternate universe, Strange New Worlds, that never visits any worlds, let alone strange ones. And but they did in the comic book series. You got to give him that. But Dr. Boyce, even though he bore no resemblance to the actor who portrayed him in the cage, but still, and he had a story and there was some threads here. It looks like they were laying ground for something wrong about him. Again, they'd already did one earlier, but it looked like, but that didn't come to fruition because it got canceled, and that's what happens. So this was the issues between 12 and 17 are the ones I went through. And even though the cover says, oh, that's it for number 1, not really. She was offered the captain's chair of another ship, and she declined. And that was it. The real setup was about Mia Colt. And what's interesting is that this I read after seeing the Roddenberry archives and how cool that looks. And what were the inspirations to the scenes, the brief scenes in the video they did, which was just fantastic looking. And granted, it's only a few seconds here and there of Spock and Yeoman Colt reunited and showing them from different eras. Because I hadn't read this time travel story that she did. Now, the time travel story in and of itself is pretty simple, and it goes, she disappeared, and it changed things where Kirk became her successor, and he and Pike butted heads, and it inspired him to leave, to quit Starfleet, and he became a merchant, a space marine, if you will. Then they ultimately pirates. And Scotty becomes his engineer. How about that? And then a bunch of other new characters and all that. And okay, fine, a little time travel adventure of, oh boy, one thing changes and it's all different. But at least they made some attempt at explaining it, of Kirk, the potential of him serving under Pike might not have gone well. And that's consistent when you consider, granted it's few and far between. It's only one episode of Pike that we see in the original pilot. But his attitude is very different from Kirk's, in that he seems a lot more strict by the book type captain. And that plays out where a guy like Kirk just wasn't that. And they might not have gotten along, And so that kind of plays out there. But other than that, but the big problem here is that time travel, yes, is in the original series. But it began at a certain point, and they went out of their way to say, well, this proves that time travel is possible. It was only theoretical. Whereas here, well, Yeoman Colt discovers this alien artifact, and she is pushed into the future. And in the timeline is set to where she mysteriously disappeared, and nobody knew why, and it led to all these other events. So that's what's depicted in the archives. It looks really cool, and it looks like they pursued that even further. I don't know if there were further stories for any kind of recalling that or what have you. Apparently there was another story about Spock going to Kirk's gravesite after generations and that sort of thing in some comic book. I'll have to look into that at some time. But basically the Mia Colt scenes, and it looks so cool because it looked, they got these actors who more or less resembled, and certainly the guy playing Spock, they used some makeup and stuff, and he looked like Leonard Nimoy, and it was just so cool looking. It's all there's the story, you can see the scenes that they recreated from the comic book, and that's really the main interest in it at this point. The story in and of itself, well, it's a better time travel story than the one they did in Strange New Worlds, which seems, I have to wonder if they were making an attempt to steal that a little. But yeah, it doesn't matter. But the main thing is the ending should have been that nobody remembered that this happened. Because, then it's like, oh, so Spock was just pretending he didn't know time travel was possible. We'll just say this didn't happen and keep it a secret. Yeah, that doesn't quite pan out. So anyway, but that's really the only mistake there. But it is of some interest, and especially how this Roddenberry Archives thing decided to use that as inspiration for these really cool-looking recreations of the characters And damn, wouldn't it be cool to see a whole movie like that? But you know, I mean, it's makeup, not just CGI and all that stuff, which was really fascinating. And but can the guy actually play Spock? Can he even emote? Or well, Spock, he doesn't have to so much, but I mean, perform in the prosthetics? Probably not. You know. But then again, you know, with the help of CGI and stuff, and then an AI voice of Leonard Nimoy to dub the lines in, I suppose it's, you know, sooner than later that would be possible. But so much damage has been done to the Star Trek brand. You know, would there be any interest in it? And by that meaning someone to risk the money in the hopes that people would show up for it. Might be a hard sell. I don't know. But anyway, that's it for the comic book. It's not much of a surprise of which one does better, even though I appreciate the attempt, and I always thought that was a cool idea. But I think the attempt now is dead, ruined by current era approaches to that sort of thing. And probably anything of Star Trek should look to the future and not trying to relive past glories and that sort of thing. Even a Robert April series, which in a lot of ways you could do all kinds of stuff. But they would just go back to, hey, let's have him meet the Romulans. Yeah, you can't because, well, alternate universe. Okay. Anyway, that's Star Trek, the early Voyages.